While Fukuyama insists the possibilities and threats opened up by biotechnology require an international government-enforced regulatory framework, Gray proposes an alternative, a cyborg Bill of Rights to underpin the constitution of nation-states. The Cyborg Bill of Rights includes the right to freedom of travel, whether virtually or actually, freedom of electronic speech, electronic privacy, consciousness, life, death, political equality, information, gender equality, and peace. Whether we agree with the conclusions that Fukuyama and Gray arrive at is not the important issue here. What is important is they recognize that not only is biotechnology dependent on political decisions regarding the distribution of resources, but biotechnological developments create ethical issues, such as the desirability of stem cell research, human-animal transplants, cloning, cyborgization, gene therapy, and the relationship between virtuality and actuality that are dependent on political decisions and require political solutions. Excuse me. In turn, these political decisions and solutions depend on the responses given to philosophical questions regarding the essence of human being and the ends towards which human beings should be directed. Thus, while the posthumanist framework is correct to argue there's an intimate and constitutive relationship between technology and human being, offering the possibility of revealing important truths about human being often ignored, posthuman theory must also recognize, identify, and discuss the political, ethical, and philosophical issues arising from the intensification of the human-technology relationship. Only this multi-perspective focus will allow posthumanist accounts to offer an original, complex, holistic, subtle, and concrete account of our continuing cyborgization. And with that, I take any questions. Thank you. Question? Wow. Okay.
I recognize that the focus on cyborgs and biotechnology can create an opening for a critique of the distinction, human-machine, human-world distinction. But do you think the continuing focus on this intensification on these particular technologies actually can close off that questioning by only focusing on what is new?
In what way? What do you have in mind?
Well, it seems that there's two strands going. One is a critique of this distinction, that it opens this up. But the other seems to be a focus on cyborgs, a really new thing. And I think this focus on cyborgs makes it seem like this distinction is breaking down now, currently, rather than it's something that we need to challenge in general.
Sure. I couldn't go into it in the talk given the space-time, but there's this distinction you identified breaks down into two further strands, okay, which goes back to this idea of what it is to be human. Now, you've got those who think of posthumanism in terms of if you like, a temporal break from what's gone before. So what we had before was this we thought in terms of this fundamental distinction between human and other, or human and worlds, human and technology, pick your other. And so what this strand of posthumanist theories thinks is that this division is actually broken down now. Okay, so you get this temporal rupture. There's another strand of thought, okay, who one of the thinkers that another professor here, Graham Harman, will talk about, Bruno Latour, is going to challenge the idea that this distinction between human and other was actually ever there in the first place. Okay? And what that strand of thinking, I think, is what you're getting at, is going to say that that's not a temporal break. What we've had beforehand is, if you like, some sort of, they're not going to use the word ideological false consciousness, but we've had some sort of veil or some sort of misunderstanding on terms of our relationship to the world. And what we really need to do is go back, or if you like, strip away that veil, strip away that curtain, if you like, to see how we actually are, as opposed to how we think we are. Okay? And then from there, they're going to say, well, once you do that, either strand, whether you think it's a temporal beginning or whether it's something that we have to sort of deconstruct in our own self-understanding, is going to entail one, a moment of alienation, if you like, because we're going to be ripped away from all those moments that we previously thought to be certain and we thought were good, if you like, which is going to be inherently unsettling. But at the same time, once we've engaged with that alienated moment, that alienated moment is itself potentially transformative. Okay? And we have to work out what that transformative aspect is going to entail.
I guess kind of following up on that question, regardless of the strands, there's, I think, a challenge that emerges, whether you're talking about kind of this strand that thinks about the breakdown between human and technology happening now, or like the Latourian strand that thinks about the breakdown as being something that's always the distinction as being kind of false historically between kind of human and the social and the technical. And that's the question of agency and action. And I think it's important to think about, especially regarding kind of the political consequences, thinking about political agency, thinking about culpability. And I guess my question for you is, how are the different strands of posthumanism kind of grappling with this question of agency? Because if you look at someone like Latour, right, he's arguing that again, like, or even like people in political science, like Tim Mitchell, who adopt Latour, they argue that human action it's constituted by social and technical relations. But then politically, how do you think about agency? How do you think about culpability? I guess, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Basically, what this framework does is literally rip apart all our previous understandings of what we are as humans, how we're to think, how we're to interact with one another, ethics, politics, the things that I tried to bring out in the talk. And what it really does is challenge, in a very fundamental way, our legal frameworks. Because our legal frameworks are based on the idea that we are sort of like individual monads who choose what we're going to do, and we're therefore responsible for those actions. But as we heard, if we're no longer those individual monads who are responsible and are wholly responsible for our own choices, if those choices are defined by our relationship to our world, to technology, which are in turn dependent on other people's actions, etc., then that calls into question in a very fundamental way the nature of responsibility itself, the nature of intention, the nature of, for example, punishment. How do you punish someone if that person is not responsible for that way of thinking? It's very difficult, okay? And it certainly challenges how we would go about, for example, upholding penal punishment, penal laws. And so what you get here with this framework is not some sort of minor alteration in how we think. It really does touch on absolutely everything in terms of how we think, how our world is structured, how we interact with one another, in ways that perhaps we're not quite ready for, or we certainly haven't realized yet, because it touches on everything. Everything.
I like that you mentioned Oscar Pistorius, the South African runner who has artificial legs, I think at least up to the knee. It made me think of an article I read in which he said a very important moment for him is when he wanted to go outside and play with his siblings, and his mother said to his sister, you put on your shoes before you go outside, and you put on your legs. And I think it's a humorous moment, but it also made me think, legs, artificial legs, shoes, is there a difference? So I guess if I have a question, it's how far back does this go, this idea of we can talk about technology, but what about clothes? Is there a history and philosophy of addressing this? Humans need other things.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long history of that. It goes right back again to the question of what are we? How do we interact with our world? What defines our self-identity, for example? Is it something essentialist within us? Is it the way we portray ourselves to the world externally? Can we manipulate that using, for example, clothes or habits or whatever it is? What happened? The issue that you brought up about Pistorius was interesting, because what the posthumanists are doing, especially the strong versions, are saying that the way in which we can manipulate technology, or rather technology can manipulate us, is to actually get to the stage where we will no longer have to put on anything. What they're talking about is, he won't have to put on his legs. He'll just grow new legs. And once you get to that sort of level of radicality, then all of a sudden everything's opened up. And when I say this, I can't emphasize enough in this short talk, they really mean everything. To the point of sort of one of the most famous ones, a guy called Kurt Weisel, I think, who's on President Obama's technology council. So these are serious guys. These are not whacks that are out on left field, for example. These are serious thinkers. He's talked about something called the singularity, where it'll be possible, and he's done these calculations where he's tried to work out the computing power of what it is the human brain is capable of doing. And he comes up with this fantastic number of, I can't remember what it is, but it's huge. And then he says, well, just to be safe side, we'll double it. Okay? And then using, for example, Turing's test, the way in which computer power duplicates every 18 months or so, he's able to come up with a number. At what point the power of computing will be able to replicate what we think, times 2, the power of the human brain is. And the number he came up with 10 years ago was 40 years. So in 30 years' time, he thinks, rightly or not, and there are a huge number of issues that relate to this, that you're going to be able to divorce yourself from your body, upload yourself to a computer, and assuming electricity continues forever, live forever. Okay? Now again, that's a sort of whimsical point, and it seems very strange to us. But that's what they're talking about. And of course, have you ever seen the episode of Friends? They talk about just this. Okay? So these questions, again, are really fundamental, and go back to this thing. Can we do these things? Well, they're saying, yes, we can. We don't realize them, but we can.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I noticed that most of the examples are physical aspects, like the advancements are all like, you grow a leg, or even like the cognitive stuff, it's still like, they're all just chemicals or advancements that have nothing to do with more emotional or spiritual sides of being a human, whether it's, like happiness or creativity or anything that is non, like, robotic, I guess, something that's not like physical or mental or whatever. So do you think that at one point technology will advance to the extent that even computers will have some sort of like emotional or spiritual side? Or does it even exist?
There seems to be 2 parts to your question there, Mark. The first one is the relationship between mind and body. Right? We're doing Descartes at the moment in 220. Yeah? And what they're doing, what this framework is very critical of is basically Descartes, okay? Especially his relationship between mind and body, and in the discourse and method, he's going to make a distinction between humans, animals, and technology, or machines, okay? And what this framework is saying is that that division no longer holds. The mind-body, for Descartes, the mind takes primacy over the body, doesn't hold. But neither is it the case that the body takes precedence over the mind. This is the problem that we've had in sort of the last 100 years or so. We sort of just reversed the dichotomy, so we've ended up privileging the body. What they're trying to do is say, look, this idea of the relationship between, for example, our body's incredibly important for our thinking, for our perception, for the way we interpret things, which are then going to impact on, for example, the emotional, affective aspects of our being, right? So the emotions, the way in which we perceive the world, and the way in which we feel about the world, if you like, okay? So again, that goes back to sort of the ontological critique they've got, this idea of what it is that we are. Yeah? The second part about whether technology is going to become more effective, if you like, well, in a sense, it already is. Okay? Now, of course, again, it's going to give it a question of what do you mean by affectivity and what degree you want to go down that road. But there's certainly examples of certain computer systems, for example, that it's difficult to sort of explain to you without going into too technical language, but basically what they're able to do is feel. Now the problem with that feel is a big issue, right? But they're able to, for example, use sensors to sense what's around them, right? Now again, of course, that's the big problem, because you've just identified that seems to break down the relationship between affectivity and the robotic, as you put it, right? So in other words, we tend to think, again, that affects are something fundamentally different, or emotions are fundamentally different from something rational and sterile and robotic. And the whole point of the posthumanist framework is they're not. Okay? Again, that goes back to the first question. Well, are they not in essence, or is it the case that they're becoming not? And again, that goes back to the 2 strands. So as to whether it's going to occur, who knows? Go up to the engineering department and they'll let you know more. But I would suspect yes. Sure.
Question concerning those who support and those who are against, or are cautious. Is there a gender division?
No, actually, and that's what you would tend to sort of, well, the history of thinking would tend to support that, right? But usually there's not. Okay, and that's one of the things that's very interesting about this framework. For example, one of the first thinkers, Donna Haraway, the woman that sort of started off this whole framework with her Cyborg Manifesto, used it in order to bolster feminist theory. That's where this stuff comes from. Okay? Because what she wanted to do was show that we were still thinking in terms of these radical oppositions between, for example, man and woman, self and other. And she wanted to show, well, actually, these divisions no longer hold. And she appealed to the notion of cyborgization to try and show why those divisions are breaking down. Not in terms of traditional discussions of, for example, self, other, or gender relations, but to do something in a way that introduced technology into the relationship. Okay? You've also got, for example, in the strong post-humanist mix, you've got a number of, obviously, male thinkers, but you do have some female thinkers as well. Again, that usually comes from the feminist line, as opposed to the biotechnology line, but they are still nevertheless in there. They may want to do something different with it. Okay, generally they're going to relate it to gender roles, but nevertheless there are those in there. With the weaker versions, for example, they're more. Again, it's probably a 50-50 split, if you like. Okay, you've got males who are very sort of worried about where this will go, but you've also got some women who are feminist writers as well, who are very worried that what will happen is that this framework just reinstantiates the idea that we can, for example, control human being. Okay, and again, for a certain strand of feminist theory, one of the big problems is this so-called masculine attempt to control everything. So post-humanist theory for them in this strand, therefore, just reinforces the dominant, if you like, male perspective on control, manipulation, instrumental rationality, etc., etc. God, I said something happened there.
Okay, about the controlling everything. Like, I want to know if everyone can control everything, then how's the situation going to be like? And something else, you also mentioned that there could be some mixing between the virtual reality and the real concrete life. So how could they mix?
Okay, the first one, which was related to control.
Controlling, like if everyone can control everything.
Very good question. One of the questions will be, will everybody be able to control it? Well, you know, these procedures, and there are a number of procedures at present, are expensive. It's incredibly expensive in some cases, okay? And so it's just not possible at the present for everybody to engage with them. Well, just imagine what happens as those procedures extend and develop and become more and more and more. You're going to get to the stage where, you know, a small elite who are very wealthy, etc., can afford them, but everybody else can't. Well, that again goes back to the political issues we talked about. What do you do if somebody has got so much cognitive capability, so much capacity, for example, to live forever, but somebody else doesn't? That's going to create a fundamental division between post-humanists and humans. That's problematic, very problematic, in fact. Have you ever seen the film Gattaca?
No.
Watch the film Gattaca, okay? And you'll see some of the issues being discussed there. Yeah? And the second one was related to... At the present, it happens, right? Think about, for example, your Facebook page, your email. A lot of our daily activity is conducted online. And of course, this is just us, or in my case, a lowly professor of philosophy, right? Think about the guys that work, for example, for Google, Apple, Microsoft, etc., etc. Their lives are to far greater degrees conducted in this virtual world, right? Again, to cite a cultural studies, have you ever seen Big Bang Theory? Think of Sheldon. Okay? The idea that, you know, you can't live, you don't want to be around concrete people. Virtual reality is where everything's going to turn out. Yeah? Also, as I mentioned in the paper, there are a number of issues, a number of ways that contemporary society is using them. One of the most famous and controversial, as I mentioned, is militarily. At the moment, what happens is fighter pilots, for example, are training in these virtual worlds. Now, that's great because what it means is it cuts down on economic costs, cuts down on, for example, going out and killing people so that you get used to working out how bombs work, etc., etc. But what it does is it has a very significant psychological impact on those people. It dehumanizes them. It turns into a huge video game. I'm going out, oh great, I can destroy this house with X number of people in there. They might be there, we may not be there. Press the button, boom, great, into destruction. Next, we just wiped out 30 people. What? What are you talking about? And that's the problem. And that's the problem. What happens is, because of this distinction between these two worlds, we have to be very careful in terms of how these worlds interact with one another. How are we going to, or to what degree are we going to let the virtual world shape our actual world, and vice versa? There are possibilities inherent to the virtual world, right? We can communicate with one another far easily. Think of the emails that you send. But there's also very, very grave disadvantages that we tend to overlook. Yeah.
So, can I ask a question? I was kind of struck by one thing you said. I mean, the question, what is it to be human? And obviously, of course, that I think is at the center of all your developments here, what you're talking about. But at the same time, it's one of the oldest questions of mankind. And we know that one of the prime examples of asking that question and answering it too was the myth of Oedipus, or more precisely the Sphinx that asked him the famous riddle of the Sphinx. And it is interesting who asked him, what is it to be human? It was also a being that was a combination of two different elements. In that case of a body of an animal and the head of a human being, asked the question, what is it to be human? Now, in your particular case here, we have again a combination of two beings. We have what we still call machine and man, asking the question, what is it to be human? Now, I would like to know from you, who asks that question? A cyborg? A machine? You know, maybe we can envisage a film that says that where the cyborg asks the question, what is it to be human? Well, that's a very strange question then. So do you have any idea of who would ask that question? Maybe the question becomes also kind of superfluous.
2 points, if I may.
Yeah, sorry.
The first one about the relationship to the Sphinx, interesting obviously to where we are. It should be known in relation to the first lecture that was given here in this lecture series by Dr. Katerina Bello on Hegel. Hegel also had this point about the Sphinx, and the Sphinx played an incredibly important role, because what the Sphinx did for the first time was break down the division between God and the human. It opened up the possibility for human beings to transcend their limitations as human beings and move towards some conception of the infinite. Okay? And here again, in terms of posthumanist theory, we see the same division breaking down. Of course, it's not going to say that we're going to become gods, but what it does say is that the traditional limitations that we've thought about ourselves as having no longer holds. In relation to your second point, the more substantial point, who would ask the question of what it is to be human? Well, I guess the answer would be, why would you? If you've gone beyond the human, why would you ask that question? Surely the question would become, what is it to become post-human? We no longer ask ourselves what it is to be an ape or a monkey, do we? Some do, but some don't. So again, perhaps it's the case that our entire mental apparatus, our entire questioning will change. And the question will be, of course, are we ready for that? Maybe I can do maybe I can do two and answer them together if we go one and one.
Mine is less of a question, more of a statement, and I want you to tell me if you agree with me or not. Going back to the notion of feelings, how I think about it is feelings are chemicals that go through your head. They're not magic. They're like something we understand and we can measure. And to a degree, like, you can say that these cyborgs might have the same ability to like reproduce something that's equal to what we call the hormones or whatever that affect our feelings. And also, like, what is it to be sad? Like, to me, being sad might not be the same to you. Like, it's something, it's a concept, but we don't necessarily know 100% that we both call sad the same thing, the same exact feeling.
I will answer that in one. It seems you're in a bit of trouble there. On the one hand, you want to say that our emotions come from specific chemical reactions. That's problematic and questionable in the first instance. Yeah? If that's the case, then we would be able to understand what sadness is. You just identify what the chemical component was, what the change in the brain structure, whatever it was, and you'd understand what sadness is. Okay? We typically don't accept that explanation, and we seem to think that it's very reductionist. Right? Emotions are something more than that. Okay? The second thing is, as you mentioned, however, if that doesn't seem to sit well with what you said regarding, for example, that everybody's conception of sadness is different. It may be the case that everybody's conception of sadness is different, and those that have done Plato will understand the difference between ideas and representations, etc. Yeah? But what that means is that if you're right, and we can just look to the biochemical components of our brains, for example, we can work out what sadness is. But again, as I mentioned, that goes back to the issue. Can, for example, our emotions just be thought about in terms of these chemical components? Of course, computer science, some aspects of, for example, cognitive studies are going to say they can, but there's a significant number of the people who say they can't. Yeah, and that's one of the questions that we'll have to work out.
Okay. My other question is, we've been talking about like living forever and like how that might affect us negatively. But I was thinking, if people live, for instance, like if we could live forever, or like for a more extended period of time, wouldn't we be more thoughtful of what we do of this with this world? Because like you're going to live in it forever. It's not like, well, I'm going to do this and ruin this part of land, and then I'm going to die in 50 years or so, and that's that. I don't care anymore.
Possibly. I mean, it's one of the possibilities, one of the arguments that's put forward by the strong post-humanists. Our human finitude at the moment means that we don't care about our environment, right? To the degree that we should. And therefore, if you continued in that process, if you were able to overcome the aging process, for example, you would take more care of your environment. Possibly. History of humankind doesn't say so, but maybe that's the point. We're not interested in humankind anymore. We're interested in post-humankind. Possibly, no? I think there's, one here. She's been waiting for a long time. Start again.
So putting in consideration the political aspect and like thinking about the current increasement of globalization and world governance and its theory, and then like let's imagine that Aldous Huxley's A Brave New World literally happened. Oh no, it's fictitious, but let's imagine that. Would post-humanists imagine, like Aldous, that some people would resist being cyborgs and being part of that world government, or like would they want all human beings on Earth to be the same, in trying to create like an equality under that world government? Like how would they perceive the future if it happened?
Well, that's one of the things that would have to be worked out. No? That's part of the process. We have all these possibilities, but none of them are politically or ethically determined. We have to work out what we're going to do with that. It could be the case that we go down the stage where we have a sort of Gattaca-esque society where you've got this range of genetically engineered humans who are impervious to pain, or whatever the film was, I forget at this moment, and the rest of us who are in some sense debased or defiled or not capable of doing the things that others are, and we're therefore subordinate to those people who have the enhanced capabilities. That may be one way. Another way may be, for example, that you're in some sense forced to undergo these processes to ensure that an equalization, which is also a development of human being. Another way may be, for example, that it's left up to individual choice, which again we go back to the issues we talked about in terms of access to resources, access to biotechnology, etc., etc. Yeah. So these issues, this framework is still developing, and we still need to think about these issues. But as I've tried to suggest to you, we need to start thinking about them pretty soon. It's already here. Yeah?
Thank you very much for your contributions and questions. Of course, I think it's not the end. I saw several of you raising your hands, but maybe you can address our speaker afterwards, and ask him more questions. Thank you for coming, and hope to see you again during the next lecture.
If you've got comment cards, stick them in the thingy. Thank you.